You've written in the Sun on Sunday today to say the Conservative Party owes the public an apology for installing Liz Truss as leader. So would you like to apologise?
Yes, I think we made a mistake. We took the wrong turn. The mini-budget, as I think everyone now recognises, contained a number of false steps. I think it was wrong to cut taxes for the wealthiest, and it was also wrong to proceed with tax cuts without saying how they were going to be paid for. And to be fair, Jeremy Hunt, as Chancellor, as soon as he was installed, made clear that those mistakes would have to be addressed. And Rishi Sunak, as Prime Minister, of course, has been vindicated. Some of the judgments that he made during the course of the summer, during the course of the leadership election, have been shown to be correct. And Rishi now, along with Jeremy and the rest of us in government, have some difficult decisions to take. But what we must do is be honest with the British people in order to regain trust.
Talking about regaining trust, there's a story in the Mail on Sunday today that Liz Truss's phone was hacked by the Kremlin. An astonishing story. Is it true?
Well, I don't know the details of it, and I do know that the government takes cyber security incredibly seriously.
Do you know if it's true or not? I suspect you might not know the details.
No, I don't know the full details. And so, again, the Mail on Sunday is a trusted newspaper, but I don't know the full details of what security breach, if any, took place. What I do know is that the government has very robust protocols in place in order to make sure that individuals are protected, but also that government security and national security are protected as well.
According to the story, they say that the Kremlin gained access to confidential exchanges, including about arms shipments to Ukraine, personal exchanges with the Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng, and it's also reported that there was effectively a cover-up. You know, Boris Johnson and Simon Case, head of the civil service, agreeing to a news blackout. I mean, should Liz Truss have come clean if this was true? Well,
again, I'm sure that Liz, both as Foreign Secretary and as Prime Minister, will have followed the advice that she was given by the intelligence and security communities. I think all of us have to be sensitive, particularly those of us in government, to the fact that the more that we talk in detail about these things, the more that we risk giving information to people who wish this country and its citizens harm. So I'm sure that the right protocols were followed. I'm sure that more information, as appropriate, will be released.
I guess some people listening might be questioning, if this is, a government committed to national security, given that Suella Braverman, resigned after emailing these confidential papers from a personal email account to someone outside the government and also copying in the wrong person as well. A week later, she was back. You take a week off work if you've got the flu, not if you've committed a security breach. Should Rishi Sunak have appointed her?
Yes, we do take security issues incredibly seriously. That's why, again, I have to be cautious in responding to the point that you understandably made about Liz's phone. And it's because we take them seriously that we have strict protocols in place that govern how information should be shared and with whom it should be shared. Suella is a first-rate, front-rank politician. She acknowledged that a mistake had been made. She is working hard in order to ensure that our borders can be made more secure and that policing is more effective. And she's a valued member of the Cabinet and someone whom I admire and like.
You say that she's an effective frontline politician, but there are reports in the Sunday Times today that she ignored legal advice that the government was illegally detaining thousands of asylum seekers at Manston Processing Centre in Kent. This is somewhere where people are only supposed to stay for 24 hours. There's a report of families being there for 4 weeks. Is that acceptable?
No, the situation in Manston is not what it should be. But again, it's important to stress that the Home Secretary did not ignore or dismiss legal advice. The Home Secretary was balancing a number of different competing imperatives. It's absolutely vital, of course, that we process people as quickly as possible. It's also important that we keep them in conditions which are humane.
But are they humane now?
Yes, but it is also the case that we're facing an unprecedented number of people arriving here who are smuggled into this country by criminal gangs, and the Home Secretary is focused both on making sure that we can break that criminal network and also that we can find appropriate accommodation for people as quickly as possible.
It's not appropriate, is it, in Manston, for families to stay for 4 weeks there? You acknowledge that?
Well, we want people to be in appropriate accommodation as quickly as possible. Well, the situation is not perfect. Everyone acknowledges that. We have more than 2,000 people there at the moment. But again, these are people who, having come to this country seeking asylum, when they're in Manston, their claims can be processed more quickly and more efficiently than was the case in the past. And in Manston, there are medical personnel, others who are trained in safeguarding, in order to make sure that people are treated in a humane and civilised manner. Again, when it comes to finding appropriate accommodation for them to move on to, hotel or other accommodation, then that is costing the taxpayer a significant sum. It's important that we get that right. And one of the things that Suella was absolutely determined to do was to make sure that we balance all of the competing concerns.
I want to talk to you about levelling up.
Yes.
In 2019, you won an election on a manifesto that pledged to level up. Now, you've had 3 years to make progress on that, but the per-person spending gap between the North and London doubled between 2019 and 2021. That's according to the IPPPR. Bloomberg did a big data study about levelling up in June, and it found most places are going backwards. 21% of constituencies in the North West levelling up, 31% in the North East, only 4% in Yorkshire, 9% in the South West, none at all across the whole of the Midlands. I mean, why do you think you're going to make a bigger success of it this time than last time? Well,
the statistics that you've brought out are all powerful evidence of why it's more important than ever that we level up. Of course, the situation has become more difficult, partly as a result of COVID, partly as a result of inflation. But we won't succeed as a country unless we make sure that those parts of the United Kingdom that have been less productive, the North, the Midlands, the South West, are made more productive. And that requires, yes, investment, but it also requires much more than that. It requires giving local leaders the power to make a difference.
Do you acknowledge that you haven't done enough since that big promise in 2019 when many of them voted for you for the first time on that promise?
We've made progress, but it's not enough. You are absolutely right. So we can look at specific parts of the United Kingdom where progress has been made. If we look, for example, at Teesside and the example of Ben Hatcham, the mayor there, in the time that he's been elected, we've supported him to invest in the local economy, whether that's Teesside Airport or the new Teesworks site, which used to be the site of a steelworks, now the site of one of the biggest investments in renewables in the country. That is a change that is bringing high-value jobs to Teesside, and it's a change that's being driven by a Conservative mayor in partnership with the Conservative government.
Are investment zones still happening? They were a big Liz Truss push.
I'm reviewing them.
So potentially not?
We need to make sure that any change that we make is one which, of course, helps to support economic growth and good jobs for people in need, but also one of the concerns raised about investment zones was the impact on the environment. I've been very clear, and the Prime Minister has been very clear, that under no circumstances will we weaken environmental protections. So I will be looking with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, with the Environment Secretary and with the Prime Minister at the proposals that were drawn up when Liz was Prime Minister, and anything that might in any way undermine environmental protections is out.
On the environment, you, of course, have campaigned on green issues for many years now. But today, Alok Sharma, the government's climate change czar, has said that Rishi Sunak should go to COP27. That's the climate change summit that he says he's too busy with the autumn statement to attend. He's also said that the Conservatives will be punished at the election if you can row back from the environmental focus. Is he right?
Well, I think, first of all, Alok's done an amazing job as COP president. Secondly, our commitment to the environment is absolute and critical. Thirdly, when it comes to attendance at COP, I know that across government we want to field the strongest possible team at COP, but there are strong pressures on the Prime Minister's diary and on the pressures of others. Ultimately, I think when it comes to matters environmental, we'll be judged on what we deliver. We're the fastest decarbonising economy in the G7. There is much more to do, and we are doing it. So moving towards electric vehicles, making sure that we invest in renewables, and also critically making sure that we help nature to recover, both in the territory of the United Kingdom, but also in the oceans for which we're responsible.
If Rishi Sunak isn't attending the COP summit, why doesn't King Charles go?
Well, again, I think you entirely understand. I don't want to get drawn into details about what members of the royal family will do, where they should be, where they should go.
But it was clear advice from the government, wasn't it?
Well, again, I don't want to be... If you forgive me, I will avoid answering that question. I'll be upfront.
At least you're being upfront about it.
I will be upfront in avoiding answering that question because I don't want to be drawn into...
Just because you think he should go, that's
No. I don't want to be drawn into matters relating to where the king is, where he should go, and so on. For me, the particular approach I take towards these issues is that one shouldn't do that, but we will be fielding the strongest possible team at COP.
Now, I just want to play a video that might be familiar to... Well, I'm sure it's familiar to you, but potentially to our viewers as well. It's at hustings over the summer, where Rishi Sunak was filmed talking about taking money away from deprived inner-city areas. Let's just have a little watch.
I managed to start changing the funding formulas to make sure that areas like this are getting the funding that they deserve. Because we inherited a bunch of formulas from the Labour Party that shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas, then that needed to be undone. I started the work of undoing that.
So he's talking there about undoing the work of, as he calls it, shoving funding into deprived urban areas. And I know that you'll say, look, there is rural poverty too. I agree with you on that. But, he's not talking about, some parts of Cornwall or Lincolnshire where there is rural deprivation. He was talking Tunbridge Wells. That's 273rd out of 317 in the index of deprivation. Is that someone serious about levelling up?
Yes, because he was responding directly to a question from someone from Thanet. You'll be aware that that part of North East Kent is one of the most deprived parts of the South East, that communities in Margate and Ramsgate, even though there's been welcome investment there recently, do face deprivation, poor housing, there are a number of social ills there. He was directly addressing that point, and the Prime Minister has made clear, of course, there is deprivation in our big cities that we need to address, but there is also rural and coastal deprivation, which does need to be addressed as well. And levelling up, of course, needs to be focused on the North and the Midlands, but somewhere like Thanet is definitely an area that requires government attention in order to improve the outcomes for people there.
OK. Now, you did an interview with the Financial Times in October. This is before, of course, you had your big comeback, if you like, to the Cabinet.
Yes.
You said this about Brexit. I was quite interested in this. You said, I ask myself all the time, was it the right thing to do? I still think that it was right, but that doesn't mean that a choice as momentous as this doesn't require you from time to time to think, what are the downsides? Has it turned out in the way you might have imagined? What lessons can you learn? And I'm actually very interested to know your answer to some of the questions you posed. What are the downsides, do you think?
Well, I think it's important to look at a big question like Brexit and to recognise that you can't make a snap judgment a few years later and say definitively that everything as a result of leaving the European Union has gone precisely in a perfect way. I think, on balance, Brexit has been a significant success for this country, but I do acknowledge that there have been frictions. And my friend Steve Baker, for example, acknowledged that as we resolve the situation in Northern Ireland, that some of the things that have been said and done haven't necessarily been perfectly pitched. I think that is an example of something that we need to address. But overall, I think we wouldn't have had the vaccine rollout that was so successful if we'd been within the European Union. And in an area for which I was previously responsible in the environment, we wouldn't have a better method of supporting farmers that strengthens the environment as well as enhancing food production if we were in the Common Agricultural Policy. And in my own area, there are opportunities now that the Prime Minister is exploring to change the way in which some of the big funds, the pension funds, invest, which will mean that more money can go into levelling up areas. Those are three big benefits of Brexit.
You talk about the challenges with Northern Ireland, and I think many people would agree that it's perhaps the biggest challenge of Brexit. We'll be talking about that later on the programme as well. Geoffrey Donaldson of the DUP telling Sky News another election won't break the deadlock and the UK actually needs to focus on negotiations with the EU over the Brexit protocol. Is he right?
Well, we do need to focus on negotiations. Sir Geoffrey is a friend, and I think that I would say to him and to all the parties in Northern Ireland that we're in a stronger position to deliver for the people of Northern Ireland if all the parties get back into the executive. That is what the Northern Ireland Secretary and the Prime Minister have consistently said. We also need to negotiate with the European Union in order to find a way through. And again, to be fair, figures from Tony Blair to those in the Irish government and indeed those in the EU have acknowledged that the protocol isn't working in its current form and it needs to be fixed.
Was, going back to kind of your sort of Brexit thoughts, was the situation in Northern Ireland more difficult than you expected? Well,
I certainly thought that there would be challenges. I think one of the issues here, and I don't want to sort of, put the blame on anyone particularly, but I do think, in retrospect, the way in which the European Union insisted on the protocol as a means of resolving the issues in Northern Ireland, the way in which they did so was overly legalistic, and didn't take account of the reality on the ground.
You signed up to the protocol and Boris Johnson said it was a great deal, though.
Well, again, the protocol was supposed to be a sort of living instrument. I sat on a committee that was explicitly designed to make sure that the protocol worked effectively. And one of the things that I said to people in the EU is, you are trying to apply the protocol in a way which will mean that it will not work effectively. There has, I'm not claiming any great sort of insight, but the arguments that I was putting and that Boris was putting to the EU at the time have been vindicated.
OK, now, Just a couple of things to finish. You've prepped Rishi Sunak for his first Prime Minister's questions. You're involved in that. You also, of course, were involved in the PM's preparation for Boris Johnson, David Cameron. How do they all compare? I'm fascinated.
Well, obviously, the public will make the judgment there. I think that Rishi did brilliantly in his first...
In the preparation?
Yes.
Because everyone has different ways, don't they, of preparing for PMQs. I was wondering if, we know that Rishi Sunak's quite partial to a can of Coke. Did you have any particular ways of preparing?
Well, again, that morning we had Cabinet and then we discussed some of the questions that might come up at Prime Minister's Question Time. Rishi is, as you would expect, he's formidably well briefed. There wasn't an issue that was likely to come up which he didn't, have the full background on. And also, look, this was one of the first occasions on which the public were seeing him as Prime Minister. The thing that struck me is that he was, cool and unflappable beforehand. I'm sure, like football players, every Prime Minister will have a ritual immediately beforehand. I know that David Cameron used to have a cup of tea with 3 or 4 sugars in just to give him that extra burst. And I know that when Boris was Prime Minister, he liked to have one of the team in number 10 play Keir Starmer, and so there were 2 particular aides who at different times played Keir Starmer. Rishi likes to look at it issue by issue by issue in a very methodical way.
Does someone play Keir Starmer for Rishi Sunak as well?
There is one incredibly bright person who ran through the questions that Keir Starmer might run. I will spare the blushes of that person, simply to say that she's one of the smartest people I've ever worked with.
OK, very interesting to know that. You've had a bit of a comeback as well, haven't you? Were you expecting to be back in Cabinet?
No.
Does this mean we're going to be seeing a bit less of you in the nightclubs?
Yes.
OK, thank you very much indeed.
No, not at all. Thanks. Thank you.